Good afternoon, Hymn Society friends. My name is Stephanie Budway, and I am a member of the Executive Committee and the Director of Research from the Hymn Society. We would like to extend a warm welcome to those who are participating online and to those gathered here in person. And we would like to thank Hillary Seraph Donaldson, Andrew Donaldson, FHS, and Wendy Donaldson for sponsoring this sectional. So I have been told that there are biographies that are going to be coming up on the slides. So in order to give us as much time together, I am not going to read the biographies. There are also full biographies available online. I am simply going to say, welcome to, we are very just delighted for all of our panelists that you're going to get to meet. And so we welcome them all. They're going to be speaking to us about what limits do we place on global song. Please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today to think about the limits that we place on global song and how we can expand beyond them. My name is Katie Graber, and I'll start with a few words about musical biases, the implicit limits that we place on global song. We say we want to sing with our siblings around the world, but then we tend to choose songs that feel comfortable to us and our congregations. When we step beyond the limits of Western European sounds, we tend to choose songs that fulfill our conscious and unconscious expectations about what global song should sound like. We want African songs to sound African, we want Asian songs to sound Asian, and so on. But of course, if we stop to think about the breadth of cultural traditions in Africa or Asia or anywhere else, we have to admit that our expectations of those sounds, our received expectations of those sounds, are very narrow. If you want a more in-depth analysis of how musical bias has influenced song selection in the Voices Together hymnal, which has a lot in common with other North American collections, you can look up this article that I co-wrote with Annalie Leptison, Publishing Privileges the Published, an analysis of gender, class, and race in the hymnological feedback loop. In this presentation today, however, we will focus on expanding beyond musical biases and anxieties and limits. The 6 of us that will present today are just some of the writers who are working on a handbook about global song that will be published at a yet undisclosed future time by GIA. It also does not have a title yet, so I welcome brainstorms. This book will include descriptions of song contexts like a hymnal companion, and there will also be essays about topics that we hope will be useful to church musicians as they work to engage global music respectfully and justly and worshipfully. These essays will include overviews of regional music and how our North American canon of global song does and does not represent those traditions well. There will also be essays on topics or theoretical ideas, a few of which we will present on today: cultural appropriation, invitation, localization and human agency, messiness, translation and retranslation, and hybridity. I will start with cultural appropriation. This book will be many things, we have great hope, but there are many things it cannot do. This book cannot precisely tell you whether or not you or your community should sing any particular song. None of us up here today can tell you if it's okay or whether you should or should not sing particular things. Because musical borrowing and entering into another musical culture is complicated. I sometimes feel comfortable telling white people what to do, but even then, there are no two individuals or communities alike, and some of my advice will apply cross-culturally and some won't. My main piece of advice is to lean into the complication, embrace the contradictions and the discomfort it causes. I like to say that you shouldn't and you must sing interculturally. There are very real reasons that we shouldn't sing songs from other cultures. Mark Charles, who is also on our team, on our writing team, focusing on indigenous songs and especially his cultural heritage, Navajo music. So Mark Charles has the opinion that non-indigenous people should not sing indigenous songs unless we have a relationship with someone from that tradition who can specifically teach it to us. Others would define relationship more broadly than having someone in the room with you, teaching us the song. There's a saying, nothing about us without us. I've heard Indigenous people say this, I've heard people with disabilities say this, and it applies to any marginalized voice. Don't try to make decisions for me about what you think I want or need. You need to listen and be in relationship. But on the other hand, there's plenty of learning that I can do without making demands on people's time, on marginalized people's time. So I'm trying to show some of the contradictions here, the ways that we might talk ourselves in circles and end up doing nothing. I'm saying instead that we should enter into the humility of doing something difficult. So I've created this slider tool to help you and your communities think through these complications. And this demonstrates that there's no specific balance, no specific correct yes or no answer about whether you should or can sing a song. If you follow this QR code, you'll get to a blog post that talks more about this and includes these working sliders at the bottom. To use it, you should think about a specific song and a specific performing individual or community. If the sliders weight toward the right, it doesn't mean that you can't or should never sing this song. It means that you need to change some things before you sing it. Some of these things you can change and some you cannot. Even the first item, the identity of the performer, if we're thinking about a community, that can change over time. Communities are varied. I like to think that I think most of these are self-explanatory, but I would be happy to talk more later if anyone has questions. I'll just note the very last one, the audience knows the context or doesn't know the context. I think an example of this is jazz today. It has become common for people of many races to perform jazz, and I think because it is so widespread, everyone knows that jazz is African American music, and so when we see people performing it, we make the assumption, given the expectation of high quality of performance and other things, but we expect that they have done the work and have done the study and know the history of the music. So that's an example of that one. So this is going to be a whirlwind today. I'm going to leave it at that, leave you to explore it, and I can answer questions later if you'd like, and we'll move on to the next person.
I was sitting there trying to find words for what is the limit that I am trying to talk about. And I came up with this. It's the limits of our niceness, the limits of our good intentions, the limit of solidarity without vulnerability. Is that crossing? Am I touching something there? Maybe I'll say a few more words. When we engage what people call global song, you could also call it songs that are outside our world of knowledge, worlds outside of our expertise, our comfort zone. Often we do it from a place of niceness, meaning I want to be a nice person. I want to be multicultural. I want to be in solidarity with my siblings. That is a good thing. But I'm proposing to us that there's a limit to that whenever we do that without acknowledging that we do it because we need that gift. So it's it's not the I am a nice person engaging the gifts of these poor people as a nice person that I am, but rather I am an incomplete person that is in desperate need of something that God has given in plentifulness somewhere else. Every song is an invitation to pray, so I'm exhausted right now because I've been praying a lot this afternoon. I was in a session with Floricanto, and there was one song that had me crying after 3 measures, literally weeping. Then I was in another session now, and I had to stop singing because my soul was kind of one prayer after the other. Now, the good news about this is that because God has given different gifts to different people, you can see the, Paul's misquote of the Psalms, you are gone up on high, led captivity captive. The original psalm is, you've taken tribute from the people, Paul says in Ephesians, you have given gifts to people. And because those gifts are different, and because we're in deep need of those, then if we look at songs as an invitation to prayer, it's a special invitation to pray in ways that we would not otherwise be able to. I hope that's making a little bit of sense to you. I hope that you have had an experience where you have reached an understanding of who you are, of who God is, of how the world works, of all of these big pieces that is beyond what your own culture, your own resources, your own knowledge, your own comfort zone was able to give you. Because every cultural product is created with those restrictions. It says this, it cannot say this, and we need somebody else to help us do this. Now, we're about to sing, and you saw a video there. Wow. If we had time, I would ask you, what did you notice in that video? Because that video is we're going to sing that song in a moment, but I wanted to show you the video so that you could sense that an invitation to a prayer. Now, I am going to deconstruct it in the way that it happened to me, and maybe will echo with some of you. If not, create your own. I had a hard time. I really had a hard time with the videos. And I had to stay with it for a long time because my mind went to judgment. These people are escaping the reality of their lives. They're using worship as, spiritual cocaine to forget, all of this stuff. And of course, I know these people. These are my people. I sang this growing up. So I know that that's actually not true. I know that that's not true. But my soul was so heavy with what's been happening in the United States, particularly the numbness that I sense in the country around the assassination attempt, the violence and the numbness. And I was in the middle of those waves, and it took a sister from Brazil to remind me of 2 things. One, that when Jeezy was really struggling in the moment with the attack, seeing all this, the fear that was rising in him, the prophets say, look up to see the armies of God. It's a little bit violent image, but you know what I mean by that? You can so sometimes we need to get out of the here and look up. So I walked and I saw nature, and I saw the incredible lushness, and I started just looking at life beyond the news, the cycle, and beyond the things that are happening within me. And then the same sister later on said, sometimes we have to go under the waves, because the waves are, and my father taught me that, the wave is too big, go under. So I'm going to invite us to sing now, following this invitation to prayer. We're going to sing that same song. There'll be a score up there. But even if you may be tired as I am from praying, I'm going to ask you to pray. I'm going to ask you to first go to the level of the surface of your lives, the things that you are really like about, and either go up and see the long arc of justice, the big piece, or if it helps you, go under and see the beauty of that God is doing in the small, in your life, in your relationships, in your church, so that may lead us to that sense of praise that we were invited. So I'm inviting us to be there, to join them in prayer. Would you stand and would you pray as we sing? Exaltaré, mi Dios, mi Rey, y bendeciré tu nombre eternamente y para siempre. Cada día te bendeciré. Alabaré tu nombre eternamente para siempre. Grande es Jehová y digno de suprema alabanza. Y su grandeza es inescrutable. Cada día te ven. Let's do the English now. I will exalt my God, my King. I will praise your name forever. I will exalt your name forever. Every day I'll praise your holy name. I will praise your name forever. Lord our God, you are good, worthy of the highest praise and honor. Your greatness is far beyond us. Every day I praise your every day I'll praise your holy name. Amen. We may be seated.
Well, I grew up singing global song, I think. I didn't know that was a thing. I grew up in Brazil, and as you may imagine, I'm Baptist, and we sang a lot of music that had been translated, composed far away from South America. But my community never questioned that. These were songs and hymns that were meaningful to us and taught us and inspired us and brought us together and made us know who we were in Christ. And then later on, I moved here and I now work in a Mexican and Mexican American congregation in San Antonio. And I see the very same phenomenon. So we sing a lot of translated music, but I have never had anybody come to me and say, where does this song come from? Who is the composer? We have the hymnals in front of us and everything's there, But that has not been a great concern. I think the concern is, does this song speak to me? Does it mean something to me? Does it say something about us and what we're supposed to do as the people of God? So I think this is my first word, this idea that something that comes from far away, that you don't even know where it came from, but when it arrives to your community, if it's meaningful, you learn something, somehow it creates roots. And then this is no longer anybody else's song, this is my song. The other thing that I think is interesting, because of my experience in this Mexican congregation, sometimes I'm in places away from San Antonio, some place like here, for example, and I have been asked some questions about what goes on when I say, oh, I'm the music director of First Mexican Baptist Church in San Antonio, and they say, whoa, so what instruments do you use on Sunday morning? And I say, well, in my church, we use piano and organ. In my church, that doesn't mean all Baptist churches in San Antonio do the same. That's what I do, that's what we have. And I have seen their faces fall. How disappointing, Mexicans singing with the organ and piano. I guess mariachi, maybe that's what they have in mind. And we do like the music, and we have people that play in that style and sing in that style, but just not Sunday morning. That's not how it works in our congregation. The other thing that I heard, when I say the same thing, I work in this Mexican-American congregation in San Antonio, and somebody asked, well, what music do you sing? I said, well, we're Baptist, we're a product of the missionary enterprise, and we sing a lot of mission hymnody. A lot of things that you probably sing in your own church if you were a Baptist. And then this person told me, have faith, sister. And I'm thinking, I'm not complaining, I'm just answering your question. These are meaningful songs for us. That doesn't mean that's all we sing, but just to say, a song is nothing until somebody sings it, until somebody puts a heart into it, until somebody teaches it and you learn and you kind of get it. And that's gonna be now your song. And for that to happen, I think we have to have some agents. In my own experience, like I said, I didn't know I was singing global song, and maybe it was not global song. It was mission hymnody, and we were being oppressed by the songs we're singing. My grandfather knew nothing about any other type of music. If you were in the Baptist church, that's the music. And by the way, that's what was a great distinction. Those are the people that sing all the time. This was kind of, we were the singers. But we had agents that came to us and taught us, this is my story, this is my song, right? But I also have people that have come into my life to be these people that taught me these songs. And when I was a teenager, there was a student in my city that came because he was fleeing the war in El Salvador, and he taught us some songs in Spanish, and thought, this is great. I never worried about, should we sing that? We are not from El Salvador, we don't speak Spanish here in Brazil, but we all understood the message and maybe some kind of solidarity, maybe. He felt really good singing in Spanish in our group. And the other thing is, my own friend Jorge, he doesn't even remember this anymore, but he taught me a lot of these songs that I didn't know were part of this family of global song. And it has been very meaningful to me, very helpful. And many of them have become really my songs. So I would like to maybe be an agent to you today and sing this one song that we are still considering if it's going to be in the collection or not. So Jorge, Marcel, and I, we are the Latin America component of this project. And we are in conversation what's going to be said, what's going to be included, so that's a big responsibility. But this has been published in Santo, 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 so I thought it would be fun for us to try this. We can sing in Portuguese first. I have never sang in English, but we can just do it at the same time, no problem. It's going to be a kind of a bossa nova style, but it's a very interesting bossa nova because of who is in the room playing. So let's just sing it. it again. Now you can try in English. I will sing in Spanish. And by the way, bossa nova, not in Portuguese, by the way, right? Here we go. Examíname, oh Dios, y conoce mi corazón. Pruébame y conoce bien mis pensamientos. Examíname, oh Dios, y conoce mi corazón. Pruébame y conoce bien mis pensamientos. Y ve si hay en mí caminos de maldad. Y ve si hay en mí camino de maldad. Guíame, Señor, al camino eterno. Examíname, oh Dios. Examíname, oh Dios. Amen.
Greetings. My name is Marcel, and I'm just going to pretend I'm going to say something different and say the same thing that they've already said, using a different example. No, I'm a pastor's kid from a Lutheran background in Brazil, and I grew up singing a very mixed hodgepodge of different things, including some of the stuff that we've already sung today, which I always thought was native to Brazil. I never questioned where the song came from. But also, Castelo Forte é nosso Deus, defesa e armamento, which is the Portuguese version of Ein feste Burg ist unser Gott, or a mighty fortress, what have you. And as I heard Maria, speak, also is a global song, a song that comes from afar. So is a mighty fortress in Portuguese. What afar are we talking about? Is that a global song? Is it not? But one thing that really accompanied that singing of Ein feste Burg ist unser Gott in Portuguese in Brazil was that I was part of a tradition. I was part of somehow a pure, staunch, the Lutheran thing, is the Lutheran tradition. And as I grew up and started singing other things and playing other things, and then studying church music, a lot of the pieces of that tradition started to crumble, right? And you start to deconstruct it and question things like, what does it mean to sing as part of a tradition? What does it mean to imagine any notion of lineage or genealogy or purity in a tradition of global song? My current project is a book called Messiness, in which I'm talking about the messiness of all these cultural flows in global song, including global music, right? And I remember during my PhD, for one research project, I reached out to 12 worship leaders around the world, India, places in Latin America, Europe, Asia, and I asked them, so what do you think about global song? And all 12 of them responded with, what are you talking about? And that added more layers to what we mean by global song. What is it? Is it a guilt category for North American hymnals? Is it something else? Is it a retainer for everything that we consider as coming from afar or exotic? Why do we place some things in other categories that come from afar and other things from next door that we consider foreign, right? There's one song that is also from the Santo 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 collection, which I remain grateful for. Becky and Maria, everyone who contributed to that, it's a great resource that you should use. There's one song in that collection called Eu Quero Ser, Eu Quero Ser, I Want to Be, and I want us to sing this. And you can do it in English or in Spanish as you prefer. I grew up singing this song like this. Eu quero ser Senhor amado, como vaso nas mãos do oleiro, quebra minha vida e move-a de novo. Eu quero ser, eu quero ser vaso novo. Which version of that song is correct? I don't know. In fact, I probably don't care. I probably don't care. What I do care is what we consider to be the imagined limits of these songs as they travel. There's this perception that a song, in a sense, comes from somewhere, and many times it does, although that somewhere is not necessarily a someone. And then it travels to a different place, according to these movements, for example, the missionary hymnody that Maria mentioned. But the traveling of a song, it gives us a glimpse into the imagined limits that we impose upon the experience of congregational singing and upon the objects, the artifacts, that we look at these songs as if they're things that we can transport from one place to the next, that we consider to be a central component of that singing experience. When a song travels, it does more than just change or adapt. It almost like transmogrifies. And if you've ever read Calvin and Hobbes, the comic, right? Calvin has a transmogrifier. And what that does is turn him into a dinosaur or a cockroach or whatever he needs to be for his story to make sense, right? And across mythologies, transmogrification is this process of shape-shifting that, in a sense, if you go look at the stories, also changes the substance of a thing. The process of becoming a wolf makes you more lupine in that sense. It makes you understand something. When a song travels, it transforms essentially, it localizes, and the resulting lattice, the matrix, the new constellation of the new constellational semantics of what and how it means, how it signifies, how it indexes, those are also transformed. And over the past couple of years, I've been focusing on matters of translation and what the translation of a song changes when you change the lyrics, or when you adapt those lyrics, or when they're in a different language that you think are a translation, when they are in fact a new thing. So when a song travels, and with this I kind of wrap up this little reflection, the words change. And in the process, the apophatic, elusive nature of poetry asserts the independence of processes of localization. In other words, you don't get the same thing that you had before, no matter how much you may narrate that as singing unity or singing, we're singing the same song, a Infesteburgo, a Castelo Forte, a Mighty Fort. No, you're not. You're really not. You may be sharing an imagination of what that means, but that doesn't mean singing the same song. So words change, style changes. And when style changes, the replication of pattern, to use one of the definitions of style by Leonard Meyer, is inverted. It's disrupted by the cultural ebbs and flows that are different from those in the song's place of origin. Processes of theologization change, and these new constellational semantics within new cultural contexts, they dictate fresh dynamics of association. So the circuitry is different. And because of that, the theologization that happens is different. I wrote, for example, about the Portuguese translation of A Mighty to Save by Hillsong, which includes the word grace, which is not in the original version. What does it mean for a Brazilian Lutheran to sing a translation of A Mighty to Save that talks about grace, or an Australian Assemblies of God person singing what they consider to be the same song? Bodily engagement changes, and further enhances the cultural embeddedness of the congregational singing experience. And throughout these processes, the manipulation and use of songs as artifacts of material religious culture, they follow new patterns within cultural economies, and they produce new products. So when I sing, when I invite us to sing, when we do Eu quero ser, I want to be, we can say that they're related, but they're related in the sense that different cousins who grew up in different countries are related. Not like, two twins educated in the same household. If you have questions about that, ask Darrell and Darnell. These songs are shared, but they're probably not shared in the sense that we narrate them to be shared. What I'm doing in Messiness is celebrating that as a good thing, as a multiplicity of possibilities, and not necessarily as a negative disruption of any narrative of control. So when I think about the limits of the singing of these repertoires, the idea is to reframe the experience into an experience of multiplicity that we can celebrate even as we learn from each other. Thank you. Don't put a microphone in your pocket.
Good afternoon. I grew up in Kenya. It was previously a British colony. So we sang hymns in English. We have a national language called Kiswahili. I'm standing on my tiptoes because I'm not sure about the height of this thing. And then we also spoke our different languages in Kenya. And the particular language that I speak has 16 different dialects. So it's a different language from other languages. So we learned these songs, songs from Christianity in at least 3 different languages when I was growing up. One of the songs that has made it into North American hymnals is a funny song called Chakutumaini Sina in Swahili. It's also titled Kwake Yesu Nasimama. Both titles are the first lines of the stanza and the refrain. It is actually originally a translated hymn, My Hope is Built on Nothing Less, or On Christ the Solid Rock I Stand. And the lyrics were written by an Englishman called Edward Mote in 1834, first published in 1936. The Kiswahili translation that has made it into a lot of songbooks and hymnals was first published in 1902 in a book, a hymnal that now we reference as Nyimbo Standard, that was put together by a coalition of missionaries that included Anglicans, Presbyterians, and others who formed African Inland Church, who were active in Eastern Africa at the time. The English original, because Kiswahili was spoken all along the East African coast, this song made its round on the coast. But as missionaries went inland, they took it also inland in the Swahili version. And then translators by different mission societies had their own hymnals, and they took the Kiswahili hymnal and translated the Swahili version into local Kenya languages. They didn't use the English original. It has a very, very interesting history. I thought that we would start by singing it. I don't know if you can read the music over there, in a version that you may understand, with the tune that was written by an American. Edward Mote was English, the lyricist, but the tune that we are singing was written by the American William Bradbury in 1863, and it is this tune that was mostly translated to Eastern Africa, although I have sung it with different versions because it's in long meter. I can sing it to different tunes. So let's just sing it a little bit before I talk a little bit about the cultural labor of translation. We'll sing the original English first, the other one. Yeah, just so that you are familiar with the English song. Okay.
My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand.
Yeah, so we can sing this song in Kiswahili with that tune, and we sing it actually many times with that tune. But the new tune that he was about to play at first gained prominence in Kenya in the 1980s. We just started singing it in church. We have no idea who first sang it, and people didn't like to identify themselves as authors of songs at that time because of the climate at the time that Africans could not really compose tunes. So we just, sang it in church like it's a thing. Let's try and sing that version in Kiswahili if you can read it, and then, yes, if you can't read it, just hum.
Kwake Yesu nasimama, niye mwamba ni salama, niye mwamba ni salama, niye mwamba ni salama.
That's the refrain, but the tune for the stanza is exactly the same as that for the refrain. The funny part about it is that the American versions, they start with the refrain but not the stanza. When we sing it in Kenya, we start with the stanza and then go on with the refrain. Usually in American hymnals, this tune is referenced as having irregular meter, but actually it is not irregular meter. It is long meter. Kwake Yesu nasimama, ndiye mwamba ni salama. Right? It is the translation that is irregular, but usually the translators, if you look at the top of it in the hymnal, they'll say it's irregular meter. But if you were to sing it in Swahili, you would think about it as long meter because the translation was according to the original in terms of the syllabic number like that. Also notice that the original refrain was made up of 3 lines with the second line repeated, but the new version has 4 lines with the second line stated 3 times, which is another way of alluding to the English original where you usually had 4 lines. But elsewhere I've talked about the 3-line idea that was translated into blues from Africa, if you think about blues with 3 lines. But with blues you have 1 line repeated and then a punch line. In this case, you have punch line, then the next phrase, then repeated. So it was one way also people thinking about what do we do to separate the sacred from the secular, the profane from the other. So instead of doing it the way the blues went, they did it the other way around. It's a very interesting technique that they do in that sense. Let me just look at the lyrics on the next slide. The lyrics of the hymn gained a lot of cultural significance in the Kiswahili translation. If you look at it, you can see that these lyrics speak about hope. They speak about hope. And if you think about the colonial situation that created cultural, social, political, and religious dissonance and anxiety, it makes sense that the lyrics would have such, they would fit with the people. The next slide will show how those lyrics actually translated. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide. I did it the wrong way. The next slide. Yeah. No, go back. That one, yeah. These lyrics, if you look at it, what I've done is translate the Kiswahili lyrics almost literally into English. And you can see from reading those lyrics that they contain hope because there's anxiety about where people are going next because of the colonial system. So that finding a way to live on their own with strangers telling them how, finding a place to stand firmly, a place of salvation was a conscious and unconscious struggle, not just in the spiritual realm, but culturally, socially, economically, and politically. At a recent singing in the memorial service of one of my academic mentors, an American mother, Mary Oyer, I gained a different perspective of how the retranslation of that translation also gained cultural potency in the lifeways of the Mennonites and other congregations that have adopted the English version for their religious use. It was obvious that they enjoyed the tune with the new text, regardless of what those texts meant to the Kenyan population, who created the new tune that better reflected the melodic characteristic of the language and the urban popular styles of the 1980s. So the next slide shows how that Mennonite congregation took, just comparing the original English and then the translation, and then the retranslation from Kiswahili into English in contemporary society, so that it makes sense for the congregations that are using them. I was curious about what those lyrics speak to the Mennonite lifeways, their concerns, and that are addressed in the new lyrics that they translated from the Kiswahili original. So it's making an interesting round like that. Poetically, this English version is in irregular meter, 8787. The tune itself is also part of a global urban popular collective. The type of tune and style and chordal structure speak to popular music sensibilities and how the industry has set a type of standard in order to identify styles and label them mostly for marketing versions. The other thing that I thought might be interesting for you to see is the three versions, from the Old English version to the retranslation from Kiswahili to English, like literally, and then to the Mennonite translation, the retranslation from the Kiswahili into English according to the Mennonite congregations that translated it in this way. So you see that Old English version and then the Mennonite translation and the retranslation that speaks to different people adopting the song and translating them in the ways that make sense to them and their situations in their world. What I thought about was that the early missionaries, in translating these hymns, were trying to establish certain standards of lyric and text and Christian message. In a way, they were kind of establishing a type of brand that they believed to be the most appropriate for Christian worship, notwithstanding that it was a Western cultural nominal. The standard was merely a baseline. While there were attempts at uniformity that were achieved through the tune, the look of the uniform is adjusted by the wearer of that garment. And one way that Kenyan congregations adjusted the look of the uniform was by changing the tune. And one way that the Mennonite congregations adjusted the look of the uniform, because it would look different if I wear a jean and he wears a jean. Because of our shapes, we will look different. It's the same jean, but it looks different in that sense. So the retranslation becomes a very interesting document to look at in speaking to what people are hearing and seeing, although somebody is trying to make us all uniform, our shapes and our sizes and our context change the shape of that music. That's what I wanted to share right now.
I'll save time. I'll stay here. Thank you for having me. I'm very short. I will not say too much things. One of the issues that we deal with, and I'm going to present from the point of the global south or the majority world speaking. I think we heard this morning, Fernando presented an emerging paper. And I really wanted him to talk about power. Because a lot of times, the idea of globalized music or global world has to do with who has the power to decide. As you have heard from Jorge, you've heard from Marcel, you've heard from Maria, we don't care. Because in the first place, all our hymnody is global. Think of it this way. Victorian hymnody came to us through the missionaries. By the way, that's global for us because it never originated from our shores. We received global music, and then they became ours. It became our heart song. And now we have foreigners coming in to tell us, sing us your song. Give me a break. How can we do that? We won't sing you our songs, which is what we have already in our heart song. And we will be, great is thy faithfulness, blessed assurance. And then you see their face drop because that's our song. No, it's not. It's our song. It's in Portuguese. It's not in Spanish. It's our song. And so I think the whole issue that we need to be working on is the scriptural text. And recently I've been struck by the term, by the rivers of Babylon, where the captives tell the captured people, the exile, sing us your song. Now, who in their right mind has the power to decide they should sing them their own song? It's the power of the people who conquered them. They have the power to decide, sing us their song. Now, if you were to be left to us, we will sing the songs that we want to sing. And that includes great is thy faithfulness, blessed assurance, and all that. Now, the world has changed. So right now, there's this particular expectation that we need to do our own song, which is what I've been trying to do. And I'll bring you to my context. Singapore is a tiny little island that you cannot find on the map. You can see the name, but you can't find the island. It's so small. And we are thoroughly colonized by the British. We have English tea at 3 p.m. We don't wear native clothing. We are not topless. We wear clothes. Jeans is a common feature. And so the thing is, we are thoroughly westernized. So where do we find our own songs? And that's the search that I've been trying to work on. And so very quickly, I'm going to share this particular song that I wrote as a kind of experimentation. And you can sing with me. Do you think you can follow along? I'll play the melody once, and you can come with me. Okay, here goes. Whoops, I just flipped the thing. I just flipped the thing. Let's try. Last stanza. Reason cry, beer, walk with us. And so this is a foretaste of what I hope churches in Asia will begin to explore, a kind of a hybrid expression that blends the Western, that is our missional heritage, and something that comes from our own cultural tradition. This is something that I'm experimenting, and I hope that other Asian composers will come alongside, and I can tell you that's happening in Indonesia and other parts of Asia as well. So thank you.
You guys did great. I was so threatening. You cannot go over time. I thought we wouldn't have this much time for questions, but maybe if all of you want to come up, if you have questions for specific people, we'll take questions. Who has questions?
Sui Hong, I hear what you're saying about great is thy faithfulness, but I can't help but think that the Western music was imposed by missionaries, ignoring the cultural norms of the area where they came in. And I feel like we missed out when we as Jorge said, we need the music. And so that's just, I'm conflicted right now, because there's special gifts that each culture has to offer, and Westerners just kind of ignored it.
Thank you for your question and your comments. I think I can only speak for Asia, so I'll speak from Asia point of view. Before Christianity came to Asia in the 18th, 19th century, you need to know that Asia already had Buddhism, Islam, and Hinduism. They were there even before Christian missionaries came onto our shores. So a lot of our cultural practices, a lot of our music making are tied to these other faith traditions already. So when you say about, well, we would have loved to receive the materials that were in the local, if you were a missionary in the 18th and 19th century, that would not be possible. Because if you were to come in, there's no way for us as Christians, as a minority faith tradition, minority, not like here in North America where everybody assumes to God bless America, there is a Christian God. When you say India, God bless you, you may mean Shiva, Krishna, and Jesus is just one small little God in their pantheon, right? And Buddhism has no God. They are not interested in God because they are all aiming towards nothingness. And in Islam, there's only Allah, only one Allah. So how then, if missionaries coming in, their difficulty was, how then do you carve out a space for them to have a sense of Christian identity without mixing and diluting or syncretizing your Christian values and faith? So yes, we missed out, but I think the good news is, fast forward to the 21st century, we are beginning to recover. I think one fault that I would find with missionaries is they never taught us how to find our own way. There is a lack of theological education and lack of training our people to be critical thinking leaders. And that's what we are trying to do now. And that's what you all can help us in Asia to do this.
Thank you, Sui Hong. That's helpful. I want to clarify my comments because Jean gave me the, when she spoke about jeans, and you wear the same pair of jeans, but it's going to look different on you. I think that's what I was referring to, meaning I think all of us are here, I'm going to test this, that we're all against this reification of global music, of this fetishizing of something that is that. And rather, I think we are pointing at something that is ever growing and changing, and that's messy and that's hybrid. But that after all, the part that I was trying to put out is it's happening out there. And if we want to pray, then we need to watch a lot of YouTube videos. Or go to your neighborhood church, that's what I'm referring to. I wasn't talking so much about an essence of culture that remains pure and forever, because that doesn't exist. when we sang, My Hope is Built, that is sung in 1,000 different ways. It was a bit slow for me, by the way. Thank you very much. It was like, come on, people, you're boring me here. That, I think, this is part of the beauty of what Sihong is bringing to us, that within what he played, the Asian spirit is there, and so is many other things. And I would say, and also with you. I think there's a line from Jorge Drexel that you taught me. Can you say it about, I am not, say it, please.
Yo no soy de aquí, pero tú tampoco.
Yo no soy de aquí, pero tú tampoco. I am not from here, and neither are you.
And I'll just add that it would, so 100 years ago, the colonizers came in and said, don't sing your music. And it would be just as bad for me today to say, well, now I know what's best for you. Sing your music.
Yes.
Other questions?
Yeah, I spend lots of time these days looking at the ascription lines and hymnals, the text and musical sources. And I'm struck by the tension between needing to know the author and composer had a very colonial project, but also the need to contextualize and how to balance those two things.
I'll start, and then we can. I think the first thing I want to say is that I think that for the past several years, the Hymn Society has been very hospitable to conversations about things like that, about authorship, intellectual property, copyright. All of those things. And I think I always end up coming back to the ethics of the practice. If you talk, I was interviewed, for example. After the last World Council of Churches, Sui Hong was the music director for that, and several of us were doing whatever he told us to do. I went back and interviewed a bunch of people that were part of that group. And one of the things that I was poking at them with was, if I took what we did and took it to SEM, synthesized for ethnomusicology, I would get screamed at because, in a sense, one of the things that, depending on what corner of ethnomusicology you're interacting with, you're not supposed to do that. Or a bunch of the practices that we were engaging in. I remember one interview with an Argentinian musician, and I told him that, and he laughed. And then he explained that for him, the ethics of the musical practice have to do with me giving you what I have and seeing how you play with it. And in that process, something new, something different is created, and musicking is fun if we're doing that. If we're not doing that, if we're encapsulating the musicking into some kind of glass dome of authorship or publishing or what have you, then we're sucking the life out of the very thing that makes music interesting. That was his perspective. Of course, there are all these other questions, right, about the economy of music and the fact that people have to live off of it. I'm not denying any of that. I am saying that it's important to pay attention to the ethics of the practice, and that it's probably a bad idea to apply one conceived ethics of practice to all modes of congregational music making and consider that any kind of norm. In that sense, it's just as imperialist to. I remember when CCLI came into Brazil about 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, and they sent out folders, brochures to thousands of churches around the country. And basically they were saying, we're here to help you solve your copyright problem. And the Brazilian pastors were like, we don't respect copyright, we don't have a problem. And their office shut down. So the ethics of practices were so different that the expectation of one in terms of how that was supposed to unfold was very different. I just wanted to throw that in. The ethics of practice, I'm not saying there needs to be only one, but I do think that these are under-narrated as we set up these cultural interfaces that are supposed to regulate the flow and capture of these repertoires into our musical practices. I don't know if anyone...
Also, a few people, at least Maria and maybe a couple others, talked about not knowing where songs come from and making them their own. But we in this room are the gatekeepers, and we know the back end of how music gets made and written and published or not published. And it is important to have a variety of composers and voices in our congregation, even if the people singing it don't know. And we need lots of women composers so that some can choose to sound like women, in quotation marks, and some can choose not to, and some composers from around the world can choose to embrace their ancient cultural heritage or choose to embrace hybridity. And so even if, and I think it's also important to help the congregations understand these kinds of things and to think about where songs come from. But even if they don't, we all know that it's important, and we can still be working to create that diversity in our repertoires.
Let me jump in a little quickly. Sometimes we only looking at the hymn society, we're only looking at songs because they are song as an artifact. I think what's more important that we are sharing this afternoon is that there are stories behind the song. There are rationale, there are reasons why songs became the way they are. So I think when we are introducing songs that are not from your culture to your congregation, tell the story. Get to know the story. And because they have lots of stories, by the way. Well, I mean, sometimes it's gossip, but it's still story. It's fine.
Going back to the previous question, I would like to say something about this idea of the missionaries coming and kind of blocking the culture or not allowing you to do it. From my perspective in Brazil, I would say that what happened in Brazil is that, well, Baptists specifically, my tradition, in the Baptist world, they did a lot. But if you look at the Brazilian landscape, that was a drop in the bucket. They did not eliminate music or rhythms or play instruments or carnival. I mean, there was a choice that was an addition to what was there, right? And so the fact that I did not grow up dancing samba doesn't mean that Baptists destroyed samba in Brazil. It's just, no, it's not true, right? So I think it's just one more thing that was added to that landscape, at least in our context. They did not bring Christianity to us. You know, the Portuguese did that in the 16th century, their version of Christianity. That was just a different way of being Christian. And with that, they brought also different ways of singing, for example. But I just to say that I think it's good to keep in perspective, even in my generation, we were invisible. Nobody knew what a Baptist was in my school. I was the only one. So we're not there, they were not able, if that was ever their desire, to eliminate that culture and impose their own. They were not really able to do that.
I grew up Pentecostal. We had the missionary hymn, and then we had songs of the Spirit. The repertoire is wide, literally. What is interesting for the hymnal for me is which songs became attractive to people in the West that had been transformed in Africa. As I speak, there's other songs that came out of that hymnal that I talked about that people are inventing new tunes for right now because the original missionary tune was different. And people are looking at that lyric and what it means and transforming it. So there are a lot of layers there. Sometimes, like Katie says, it depends on the gatekeepers, what they put out there. And what they put out there half the time speaks to what they know. It speaks to what they know and what speaks to them, like that. So part of what I find interesting when I go to American churches is, what are they singing out of Africa? When I go to an African church in America, I find a completely different repertoire. So I'm very curious if some of you actually visit like African churches, like recent African churches, recent immigrants, not the traditional African American, but African churches, because there are plenty in literally any town in this country. And when I go to those churches, the repertoire is actually different and similar, because they live in America, but they have this world that they bring as well. So what is attractive to people who write these hymnals, like Baptists and Methodists and other people like that? A very different story from the Pentecostal group. If there was a Pentecostal group in here, we would have a whole different set of songs, because of songs that come out of the Spirit, where we sang in styles that were familiar to us in the village. Like I said, I grew up in the village. So we sang songs from the hymnal, then we sang other songs that we got in the Spirit. And that texture was also very, very different, you know. But about the ethical issues that also arise from copyright, what I find fascinating is, because people, especially on the white side, excuse me for saying it like this, are very aware of the ethical, or kind of overstretch the ethical issues to the point of silencing the song. Because they stop performing it saying ethical this, ethical that in their world. They don't sing it, so the song dies. Two, because they don't sing it or recognize the owners, they also don't pay the people. So they silence the song and they silence the money too. So all of you who are gatekeepers over here to those songs that you find fascinating, do your research. You'll probably even find an author if you want to pay them. Like, seriously pay them. Some of you are scared to actually try to find it. But I do my research. That's my profession. I do research on this stuff. And I find out stuff, and I find out it was actually written by this person. They will not come out because there's a whole drama to it. Or it was written by a group of people. Some of the songs that I research are written by a collective who contribute to it. And nobody wants to say it was mine because it was the collective, like all of us wrote it together. And then we are like, now if the money comes, will there be a fight? So let's not even talk about that, because we might fight and stop being friends like that. But on the ethical issue that you raise, if you silence the song because you're afraid to sing it because of the ethical issue, you actually silence the song. So you have to think about different implications.
I want to add a voice to this piece. I know we're short on time. Thank you. It's very powerful. There's a practice that I would like to recommend to the publishers or gatekeepers, and that is that if you are getting income from something, part of that income has to flow. For me, that's like a rule. And if you don't know where to flow, call me. And no, it takes a lot of thinking sometimes, because sometimes there's collective pieces, but there are ways that we can find and that have been found, you know, so that's an important piece. And then I want to just like press on one item. And that is that for me, the worth ethical, I don't know what word to use, misbehavior, is when you actually use the song for something that was not intended to. What I like to think in my head is like, you receive a powerful vase from the Ming Dynasty, and this is, it was ornamental and it was beautiful, and then you use it to feed your cat. So, you know, I call that the Siyahamba effect, you know. So say you have like all of this power around a political movement, and then you use it going back to prayer, you know, so it's like, if you are singing, and by the way, it's not true that the one who sings prays twice. Sometimes it's just singing, and you're not praying at all. You know, because I've done it, I do it all the time. But in this case, we have to, we must, because it's an ethical call. Again, because it's stories behind it, it's prayer, it's God behind it, and because we need it.
Okay, we are at time, but all of us are here if you have other questions. I think we'd all be happy to answer some more questions. Thank you all.